was the one horror movie as a kid that scared the hell out of me. All the other ones, like Frankenstein, he was kind of tragic and sad, and Dracula was sexy and kind of cool. But the only one that really scared the hell out of me was The Mummy. I don't know what it was about it, but it just petrified me as a kid, and I always remember certain moments in The Mummy. I probably saw it when I was like 8 years old on the television in black and white, and I've never forgotten it.
The Mummy. Is it dead or alive? Human or inhuman? You'll know. You'll see. You'll feel the awful, creeping, crawling terror that stands your hair on end and brings a scream to your lips.
Universal had been trying to reboot The Mummy since the early 90s, and they went through a bunch of iterations, some more campy, some more overblown, some more small-scale horror-centric. They approached people like Clive Baker and George A. Romero as potential candidates to direct the film, but nothing really seemed to fit. You know, they couldn't find a tone that they wanted to go with. And Stephen Sommers, coming off the back of Deep Rising, which although was a smaller scale production and not a commercial success, but has become a cult classic, and even at the time critically was seen as a really well done, fun monster action film, came in with his own pitch, which was basically, I want to do it in the style of an Indiana Jones adventure, but with the comedy dialed up. They absolutely went for it. They loved it. They were like, sweet, this is the tone, this is the style, this can be a franchise, this is the perfect mode to reboot The Mummy. Unlike Deep Rising, where his budget kept getting slashed and lower, and the cast went from A-listers to B-listers and kind of C-listers, for this film, as he developed the project more and showed Universal what he was working with, how the script was coming together, how the design of the creatures was coming together, they just kept putting the budget up and up and up because they kept believing in his vision more and more and more. And when it came to casting, for the main role of Rick O'Connell, the hero of the film, they were approaching people like Tom Cruise, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, you know, household names, massive stars at the time. For Evelyn, which eventually went to Rachel Weisz, they approached people like Charlize Theron, established actors. But Sommers had a lot of influence over the casting, and he decided that for the main star of his film and the rest of the cast, he didn't just want like an established star, and he didn't just want a Sylvester Stallone type pure action guy. He needed someone who could make the action believable but also was very funny, had a real charisma to him. And he ended up going with Brendan Fraser, who described it as making a roller coaster, despite the fact that shooting in Morocco was a bit of a nightmare. They even joked that the Curse of the Mummy was real and it was on the film because everyone was coming down with food poisoning, dehydration. Brendan Fraser nearly died while filming the hanging scene, as well as getting a whole host of lifelong injuries because he was insistent on doing his own stunts. A lot of the cast felt like the film really was cursed. The local Moroccans, who were also very superstitious, kind of fed into this because they were insistent on doing blessings on every single set or before every single day of shooting. But by the end of filming, Brendan Fraser described making the film as like going on a roller coaster ride. Insane, really fun, but also carnage. And although you don't always enjoy carnage while you're in it, as we discovered because we recently went to visit the pyramids with a few of our friends and spent a few days in Giza and Cairo. And, you know, I don't ever want to go back there in 2026. So I can't imagine what it was like in 1920s when this film is set. It must have been insanity.
We saw Cairo. It looked like CGI, but in the film in like the 1920s. And it looked like...
It looked the exact same.
Yeah, but some of it, when they were in the guy's library and Evelyn's working in the library, they look like nice buildings.
So the production was a bit of a mess, but, you know, the carnage sometimes is the most memorable bits. And once you're out of it, or even during it and you've got used to it, it just becomes part of the fun. Just a sensational film.
I can see where you're coming from with the similarities to Indiana Jones. A lot of shady characters looking for treasure, a lot of one-liners, you know. There's even like a scene later on where Benji, similar to Indiana Jones' hat through the closing doors. The film starts back in old Egypt. The reigning pharaoh and Imhotep, his high priest. It seems like the high priest is the most powerful, even over the pharaoh. Just his abilities, he can.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He can resurrect people from the dead, and he can do this and that. Whereas the pharaoh's just the guy, you know.
He's also clearly got the gift for the gab and charm because he's also hooked up with the pharaoh's missus.
He's a dirty boy. Is Imhotep.
Well, he's also a bit of a romantic. I think that's a bit harsh, even though he was having it off with the pharaoh's missus.
And no one's allowed to touch her. The pharaoh storms back in and he's seen someone's touched his missus and he says, "Who's touched you?" And unfortunately, they murder the pharaoh in cold blood. The pharaoh's bodyguards storm in. Imhotep's mistress, instead of being taken by them, gets a knife and murders herself, does the deed for them. Obviously, Imhotep's lover has now died, so his main mission in life goes from serving the pharaoh, which he didn't do a very good job of, by the way, because he took his girlfriend or whatever, to resurrecting his lover.
He wants to stay with her and protect her, but she says to him, like, "You're the only one that can resurrect me. Just get out of here. I'll kill myself and you bring me back to life." So he's like, "Oh, do you know what? That makes sense. That's a good plan." And I always like the fact that his priests all back him. They're all painted gold and they're all kind of like fat and look the same. They're all bald and painted with weird gold spray paint. They all got his back because they know now they're basically fucked. They've probably also been keeping a lookout, I imagine, for when they're sneaking off away from the pharaoh while he's doing important pharaoh business to have it off in the background. So they've probably been like the lookout and covering for him. And now they've backed their boy. They go with Imhotep. They steal her body. They're racing in chariots across the desert as the guards are in pursuit. They make it to Hemenatra, city of the dead, and are performing the ritual to bring her back to life at the feet of the great statue of Anubis. The effects in this film are brilliant, but they're also really bad at points. You know, the set design here and everything is beautiful. All the costumes look fantastic. The CGI city looked pretty ropey, but, you know, you take it. But this CGI scene of what appears to be almost like water / a spirit that's bubbling up and then coming out, and its ethereal sort of being is going towards her to seemingly resurrect her and bring her back to life. It looks like shit. It looks really bad. And there's points in this film where the CGI is horrendous. But because of the nature of the film and because of, at times, you know, the CGI never looked incredible. Even at the time, you weren't mistaken that you were looking at a CGI mummy or a CGI city or whatever. But because the film's so cartoonish and silly, it kind of is okay. And when I was watching it for this review with Sophie last night, I was just smiling when the CGI was bad. I even turned around to her at one point. I was like, how bad does that look? But I was saying it in a good way, where I feel like this film will be timeless despite its effects because it almost works for the tone of the film. Even though it was considered at the time, I think it was a groundbreaking 140 CGI effects. Huge amount at the time, even though that number's dwarfed now by later films. He is at the moment of resurrecting her, but then the guards run in, arrest them all. They start mummifying all of his priests alive, and then save the worst for Imhotep himself. Cut out his tongue, cut out a lot of his vital body parts, bandage him up in the classic looking mummy sort of bandages, and before sealing up his sarcophagus, fill it with those terrifying iconic scarab CGI bugs that fill up the sarcophagus, start crawling around him and slowly eating him alive. Evelyn's character, who's like the librarian, historian, knows everything about ancient Egypt type person, says she's aware of this ceremony, but she's never heard of it ever being done on anyone. You know, it's kind of like the death penalty in New York State. They have it, but it never happens. It never gets done. Now, I get that whoever inherited the throne after the pharaoh would be fucking pissed and you'd want to pull out your worst punishment. But considering the fact that this punishment has the slight look for it in the small print asterisk that if he does get resurrected, which is actually, it turns out, fairly easy to do. You just have to read a few lines from a certain book that gets found by our main characters later. And if he is resurrected, he essentially becomes a potentially all-powerful being that can almost have godlike powers and take over the world. I wouldn't do that to my worst enemy. That seems like, it's like, you know, you want to get back at someone, so you do them really dirty, but built into it is that they also get entered into the lottery every week and they might win it at some point. It just seems like a bad move.
Yeah, it seems like what we're doing to you now is terrible, but you have the chance of being so powerful later. It's better to just do what they done to the priest and just kill him off straight up.
And I don't know if he was being tortured for that entire time in some spiritual realm, but if not, then he basically died a slow, grueling death, getting eaten alive and suffocating in his sarcophagus. But then next thing he knows, he just wakes up and he's this rotting corpse that gets to take over the planet 3,000 years later or whatever.
Which can turn into like sands, tornadoes, suck the life out of people, release all the plagues. Yeah, it was just stupid. The more I think about it, you're right. Imagine if the film just ended there and he was never woken up. You'd be like, oh, that's shit. So we know he's going to get woken up later. But I love this next bit where it cuts to many years later. And we don't know it yet, but it's being narrated by the head of the descendants of the Pharaoh's bodyguards, who's saying, for thousands of years, people have fought over this land. And we're introduced to Brendan Fraser, Rick O'Connell, who seems to be in an army or a mercenary unit. I haven't quite worked that out.
Yeah, it's not totally clear, but I got the vibe that it was maybe the French Foreign Legion. You know, they'd been battling, but their whole little troop had decided, fuck it, we're fighting in Libya, but we're not too far from Hemanatra, which, other than being the city of the dead and having all these, you know, curses and mythology around it, but also it's rumoured to have a secret treasure larger than any amount of treasure anywhere in Egypt ever discovered. Basically, the giant pile of gold that Smog's laying on in The Hobbit. You know, it is like the fucking, you are winning the lottery 100 times over. And they do discover the site, which seems like the story tries to tell you through dialogue that no one ever finds this city. You know, it's like this hidden ruins that is almost just kind of like legendary. No one even knows if it exists for real. But everyone in the film seems to be on their way there and know about it. So
it's like El Dorado, but you could just walk out of this shed and it would just be right there. Or Atlantis.
Yeah, world's worst kept secret. They're having this big battle. Watching over it, like you said, is our narrator, who's head of this ancient secret society who are the descendants of the royal guards of the pharaoh. And they're watching it play out and they're kind of thinking like, oh, should we get involved? They're getting very close to that Anubis statue, but let's just see how this plays out. They end up losing the battle. He's with his friend Benny, who, well, I call him his friend. He's like a little snivelling Ian Beale rat boy character who's the absolute scumbag, but most people's favourite character from this film. He is iconic. I was so sad that he dies at the end of this film. He's just fantastic. Brendan Fraser finds himself up against a pillar with a bunch of guns on him, closes his eyes ready to get shot, but then they seem to be scared of something, some sort of aura that's not quite tangible, but that's in the area, and they all run off. And then we cut from there to Rachel Weisz playing Evelyn. Rachel Weisz wasn't a star at all. She'd never starred in an action film. This was by far the biggest production she'd ever worked in. And again, it was a bit of a gamble. You know, you're making a big budget film. Usually you want stars to fill those roles to help sell the film. The more money you're spending, the more of a gamble it is for the studio as well. It's great because I love the fact that her character in this, she's not your typical female character in an action movie or an adventure movie at this point. Usually she'd be straight-laced. You know, she's the English librarian kind of. Her parents were great adventurers, but she's not, and she's kind of like the quiet wallflower who just never goes on an adventure and is unmarried and this, that, and the other, which she is. And it plays it to the cartoonish caricature sort of level, clashing with Brendan Fraser's gruff American fellow. But what I loved is that she is a genius in terms of understanding all the history and everything. You know, she's the deep reservoir of information in terms of that, but she's also a complete fucking klutz. It tells you all that in this opening scene where, you know, she's in this giant library, she's on a ladder because she's trying to put a book back, and she ends up knocking over every single bookshelf in the entire library. Great visual gag. Really sets up again what the film's going to be about. The head librarian come in and he's like, how the fuck did this happen?
I would prefer the plagues to yeah, you talk about cartoonish and that was bang on. It was like a classic cartoon where one bookshelf falls and the whole fall like dominoes, which is exactly what's happened. Like Willy Coyote holding up a bang flag and then like explodes or something like that. But yeah, I feel sorry for her, and she has been given a tongue lashing by her boss.
Understandably.
She goes into a separate room full of like sarcophaguses and coffins and various Egyptian stuff. The Grand Museum in Cairo will be proud of this room. And then we're introduced to Evelyn's brother, Jonathan. He's one of these actors, like we talked about at the beginning of The Dark Knight, that guy who's like, you don't know who you're robbing. And I'm looking at him like, this guy, who is he? Who is he?
You'd recognise him more if you're English because, you know, he was in Cold Feet.
It was Cold Feet, actually. That's the one that escaped me. I knew I saw him on the TV. Thanks for that.
But he pops up in a lot of Hollywood films in smaller parts, usually kind of like British douchebag in an American blockbuster. This is one of his biggest film roles, and he's perfect in it because he is just a slimy little greedy rat that you really like from the get-go. And that's the thing this film gets so great with the writing and directing and casting, is the fact that whether you're supposed to like a character or dislike a character, you love them. Because they're just brilliant. Like like Benny is the most slimy weasel, like we were saying before, but he's brilliant. And Jonathan's the same. And one thing I found interesting is I'm definitely not into Dungeons and Dragons. Never played it, don't know much about it, but I know that you want a balance to the dynamic of your team in terms of skills. And that plays into sort of RPG games where, you know, if you have your crew, you can't all just be heroes, you can't all just be wizards, and you can't all just be thieves. You need a balance. So you have the thief, you have the sort of guy who's wielding the axe, the barbarian type guy, and you have the magical one or the mage or whatever it's called, who's like the healer and can do magic and stuff. And you almost have this dynamic in this film because you have Brendan Fraser's obviously the warrior. You have Rachel Weisz with her incredible understanding of the history and stuff is always on hand to contribute that. And then you have the thief. You know, he actually pickpockets what turns out to be the key to not just the sarcophagus that releases Imhotep later in the film, but also to the Book of the Dead and the Book of Life that's able to both resurrect and unresurrect Imhotep. But him being a thief also plays into really important moments later on in the film in terms of, you know, turning the tide against Imhotep. So it's funny, like I wonder if he was a fan of RPGs and that sort of thing and whether that played into it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a big fan of RPGs. Playing one at the moment called Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's like a medieval one, but it's quite set in realism. And like you said, because you're one guy, you're not a team, I have to balance it out. So I need a certain level of sword fighting in case I come across a bandit. But I always go for like the charisma intelligence build. So if I can talk and like maybe haggle with a shopkeeper to get a lower price using my charisma bartering skills, or if I come to a group of bandits, maybe I can convince them, oh, this person done it, it wasn't me, go and chase him, so I avoid a fight altogether.
Well, if this was an RPG, Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell would definitely have that maxed up to 90 in terms of charisma, because he is charismatic as fuck. Evelyn recognises that Jonathan's discovered a map, and it seems to be a map of Hemanatra, which is, you know, this mythical place. No one's really sure if it existed. She goes to the librarian, and he's like, oh, you know, what is this? This is nonsense. I don't pay you to do this. Oh, no, I'm accidentally setting it on fire. I wonder if my character has more layers to me, and that will be revealed later in the film. But anyway, never mind. We discover Rick O'Connell is in prison. Kind of alludes to the fact that he was trying to pick up hookers, I think. He's clearly been in there a long time because his hair's really long. He looks like shit. Still a good-looking geezer, but, you know, he looks like a bit of a tramp. He's been beaten up. He's probably not getting fed right. And he's also due to be hung that very day. They're chatting to him through the bars. He sneaks a little cheeky kiss with Evelyn and says, get me the fuck out of here. If you get me out, I will bring you to Hemanatra. I've been there myself. So after a little bit of haggling, which we've been to Egypt now, so we know that.
Yeah.
You know, it might seem silly that she's haggling over this man that's about to be hung, but believe me, you can haggle for everything in Egypt, so I 100% believe this is plausible now. They pull the thing, he falls through the trap, and it was supposed to break Rick O'Connell's neck, but it just didn't work, so they're just watching him get strangled, which we now know actually in real life during shooting, he really did black out and nearly strangled to death while filming that. Usually you expect to see a close-up and really his feet are stood on a platform and he's just faking it. But he, you know, there's a lot of wide shots where he really is just hanging there. So I was wondering, how did they manage to do that? Evelyn gets so desperate that she just turns to the guy and says, he knows where Hemanatra is. You can get 10% of the proceeds. They shake on it. Rick O'Connell gets cut down and we have the whole film set up. We got our trio of characters ready to set off on this adventure to the city of the dead and accidentally resurrect the mummy.
Omad Djalili, who's fantastic in this for his couple scenes. even these bit part characters that are only there for like 2-3 scenes all add to the comedic elements of the film, and it's just brilliant casting. I'm so happy that Stephen Sommers kept his wish of who we wanted to cast.
No, you're so right. And as we go through the plot, we'll hit on those characters as you go. Some of them are so memorable, and I was kind of shocked by how few scenes they actually had. I remember him having a lot more.
They need to get a boat from Giza port, where we went to Giza, didn't we? We went to Cairo. Again, in the 1920s, it looks nicer than the real life Giza we went to. But I love this scene where Evie is bitching about O'Connell, saying, "Oh, he's a big brute, he was a mess," and then he turns up. Camera pans up and he's all clean shaven, and I'm not gay, by the way, but even I was like, fucking hell, that geezer's good looking.
You know, it's funny, I turned around to Sophie at the time and I was like, he was a good looking geezer back in the day, wasn't he? He is gorgeous.
I was like, fucking hell. I was like, he scrubs up well, Jesus Christ.
And it's great because you see the chemistry starting to build. Like, they've actually already had a kiss when they first met, although it was kind of a taking the piss, forced kiss. She later kind of asks him in that kind of feminine sort of, "Oh, why did you kiss me?" Oh. Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, I was about to get hung. Fuck it, like whatever. Kiss a beautiful woman for the last time. Who cares?" She
storms off. She's livid, didn't she?
Yeah, but you see them clashing, and it's brilliant because usually the kind of character she's playing pisses me off because, you know, you see it a lot in American films where if there's a cunt or a bitch, it'll be a English person playing it, and they're just a cunt, and that's almost just like, we don't have much time to convey that they're a cunt, so here's an English accent just to let you know, American audience, that this person's a cunt. We start to meet some of the other characters who are also competing to get to Hamanatra. We have a group of Americans who are also on their way there. At the same time, we got, you know, Jonathan and Evie are clashing with Rick O'Connell because he's like this gruff American and they're this proper stuffy English people who are like, "Oh, how dare you? I would never lie. I'm an English person, don't you know?" Blah, blah, blah. And usually that would piss me off, but I think partly it's because Rachel Weisz and Geezer from Cold Feet playing Jonathan are just brilliant actors and they've got great material to work with. But as I was watching it, I kind of realised there's actually zero jokes at their expense for being English, and all the jokes are at the expense of the Americans, because when they realise this other group of Americans are on their way to Hamanatra at the same time, so naturally they start getting competitive with each other. The descendants of the Pharaoh's royal guard have boarded the ship, and at this point we kind of don't know where they sit. Are they just pure villains? We don't know really what their game is. We know they're violent and they're dressed in black and they're all mysterious, so they kind of give an evil vibes. One of them manages to get into Evelyn's room while she's kind of brushing her hair and trying to revise her notes, and whilst getting flutters about Rick O'Connell and kind of like yelling at herself.
It was a rubbish kiss.
It wasn't even a good kiss, girl. Come on. And suddenly this black-robed figure bursts into the room and he's looking for the key. And it's a hilarious scene because anytime you remotely forget how silly this film is, something like this comes along where it's almost like the Austin Powers sketch, you know, where Dr. Evil sends the guy down into the death dungeon where he's been set on fire but he just won't die, and then he sends people to shoot him, and then he sends dogs and stuff. This guy just won't die. He gets stabbed and he's getting beaten up, and I think he gets shot. Rick O'Connell runs in and saves her because he's realised someone's on board the ship. And the guy starts to come to and he's looking around and he's like, "Oh, there's the key." And just at that moment, as he's reaching for it, Jonathan runs in and accidentally knocks him into the fire. And then he's just running through the corridor for about 5 minutes on fire. The scene moves on. Jonathan grabs the key and the map and all that, and he manages to get away. Everyone's having a big shootout. The whole ship's starting to go on fire. Everyone's abandoning ship. There's that great line where Omar DeGilly stops and says to Rick O'Connell, like, "What do we do?" And he says, "Wait here. I'll be right back with help." And he dives off the ship, and then you kind of realises a second later, "Oh, what?" And it's all going crazy. And then probably about 4 or 5 minutes has passed since we last saw that guy on fire. And he emerges again, still on fire, still running around trying to find the key. And I think he gets shot again or knocked off the boat.
The Americans, like...
Oh, they all start shooting him.
He's running at Jonathan, innit? And then trigger-happy American. He goes... and like shoots him 10 times, and it cuts to Jonathan. He's like, "Americans,
bloody Americans."
Yeah, so it was just like,
that's what I mean. It's like
brilliant.
All the culture clash between British and American jokes are actually at the Americans' expense, which is really unusual.
So they all jump off. Rick O'Connell's already come across Benji. Benny looks like a rat. He's got like I'm sorry, but it's like a paedophile's goatee
He
beard.
really does, yeah.
And he's got like a little fez hat, as well,
Fez,
which
yeah.
is great. And he's already come across him and just chucked him off the boat. They all jump off the boat because it's on fire anyway. And I guess they end up in the Nile. Benny's on one side of the river and Rick O'Connell and his team are on the other. And Benny shouts across, "Looks like I have all the horses, O'Connell." And then it's just brilliant because O'Connell just looks up and shouts back and goes, "Looks like I'm on the right side of the river, Benny." And he's like kicking the water. It's such a small scene, but again, I just wanted to bring it up because of the comedic, brilliant timing of the film.
And he kind of is a perfect reflection of the tone of the film. He can be an action star, he can pull off those scenes, but he's always doing it with a wink and a nod, and it's not conventional action set pieces in this film. They're almost done with a sort of cartoon flair, you know, that moment where he's on the boat and he's loading his gun and you see the bullet holes in the wood panel next to him are getting closer and closer and closer till it's right by his head, and Rachel Weisz's Evelyn moves him out of the way just an inch. There's a silly flair to every action set piece in this film. And Brendan Fraser has that perfect combination of like charisma, sarky sort of tone, but also that everyman sort of vibe to him, but also movie star good looks and confidence. And he's just perfect for this film. You can't imagine the film without him. The script is so good because it goes at a breakneck speed. It's introducing so many characters, introducing so many plot elements, so much world building and lore, whilst at the same time packing in so many great action scenes. It flows perfectly. It shouldn't work because you're throwing in so many elements and speed running the whole thing to get to the City of the Dead. But it just flows perfectly and none of it's fat. There's no fat on this. It's all trimmed down to the perfection, but without losing anything. I always forget that it takes a long time to get to the Mummy. We finally get to Hamanatra and kind of they're just chilling out, you know, they start exploring. The Americans are looking in one section. They send in some of the local Egyptian diggers they brought in to basically dig, but also be the human sacrifices because they know there's going to be a lot of booby traps sacked in here. In another part of the underground ruins, you've got our three heroes have found the Anubis statue and they're exploring and they accidentally find this sarcophagus while Jonathan is playing makeshift golf with some of the rocks and knocking it off the walls, and the whole thing comes down and they discover the mummy, but it's still just a mummy. You know, it comes out and it's like fleshy and chewed up, and that was another brilliant thing. The fact that it's not, you know, this what is clearly just a person with bandages on him. It, you know, it is a rotting zombie decomposed corpse with hardly any meat left on it. While they discover that, the Americans discover the Book of the Dead and also 5 or 6 ornaments laid in gold that they're all excited about because they're like, oh, I bet this will be worth a fortune. But we know, if you remember from the opening scene, that's where the vital organs of Imhotep's lover were placed. So I have a feeling he's going to want them back. It came out when I was, 8? And I remember just being obsessed with it from the moment I saw the trailer. Finally getting a VHS copy and getting to watch it round my cousin's house. And I just remember being so enthralled by it. I was young enough to be genuinely frightened by this film. Like, as an adult, you won't be frightened. You'll just be cracking up the whole time. But watching it as a kid, you know, when those scarabs are digging into someone's body and you see that shot of it crawling underneath the skin of the man's chest till it gets into his eye and is eating his brain. I remember I literally had to run out and hide in the corridor, and I was like watching it through the crack in the door. My little 8-year-old brain was disturbed by what I was seeing. You know, it's the kind of film that you could really feel like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Kind of reminded me of Kevin Bacon when he was making Tremors. Apparently had literally a breakdown in the middle of the road. He pulled over driving and was just like in tears talking to his wife like, my career's going nowhere and I'm starring in a fucking movie about giant worms. Like, what am I doing? This is going to be terrible. And you can imagine how with such an uneven, strange tone, such comical, almost parody-esque moments in The Mummy, you know, the actual set pieces themselves at times, you could picture how, you know, when they say, hey, there's going to be millions of scarab bugs chasing after you and you got to react to them and be freaking out and running around and banging your head off a wall because one's climbed into your brain. Just trust us. We had to CGI in the mummy right now, but it's going to be really good looking. So just believe that and sell the fact that there's this terrifying walking reanimated mummy corpse walking around these corridors and chasing you. You know, there's plenty of moments where you would just turn and look and be like, this is fucking stupid. This is corny. This is going to be a flop. Evelyn notices the fellow with the fez coming out of the ruins with the Book of the Dead. Firstly, she's like, oh shit, that's the Book of the Dead. That's the whole thing she came here for. She doesn't care about finding the mummy. She wants to see this. Although the Americans don't give a fuck about it because it's just some old dusty book as far as they're concerned. The geezer with the fez understands the reverence of it. So she waits for everyone to go to sleep. She sneaks over, nicks the book from him while he's kipping, opens it up and starts reading from it. As she says the final words, down below we see Imhotep's rotting corpse finally come to life. And it's such a great moment because it's teasing you, like he's finally come to life. It's like 45 minutes in or nearly an hour. And you're like, right, let's get to the mummy shit. But we cut away to up above as the little guy with the fez she stole the book off wakes up and he's like, don't read from the book. And the locusts suddenly show up and everyone's freaking out and it's swarming. And there's that brilliantly slow moving in dolly shot on the guy with the fez as he's covered with locusts saying, what have we done? And then it's down below because the locusts have driven everyone underground and they're all headed in different directions as the scarab beetles start to break out and swarm everywhere. They all start to get separated and the poor little fellow with the glasses that get trampled. Velma. My glasses. He's the first one to accidentally come across Imhotep in his mummified corpse form. But it's brilliant because obviously his glasses have been broken. We see it from his POV view. So again, you've waited an hour for the mummy, but still you're just getting these little glimpses. This poor fucker, man, gets his tongue and his eyeballs taken out.
Evie has jumped on a platform to escape the scarab beetles, and again this reminded me of Indiana Jones. You know that scene with Indy and Sean Connery where they're kind of like tied up and they keep changing the bookcase around. It reminded me of that exactly. She's gone through and then she sees the guy, like the back of him, is like, oh, good Lord, I'm so great. And he turns around and he's like, like all his eyes are going,
took my tongue.
We finally see Imhotep because he comes up to Evelyn and obviously by accident, but she's still done it, she's resurrected him. So thanks him for like resurrecting her. And obviously she's like fucking terrified and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen here?
How does he thank her? Chooses her as the human sacrifice.
Chooses her as a human sacrifice. And you're watching it like scared, worried. I remember watching it for the first time and I'm just there like, come on, Rick, like, where are you, mate? Like, and then obviously Rick comes in and goes, there you are. And then he like looks around and he's like, oh my God. And he gets the shotgun. The shotgun is the ultimate weapon for any
horror movie,
any
sort of
supernatural
scenario.
thing. And he thinks, that's it, I've shotgunned it. And, you know, he goes outside. The Pharaoh's bodyguards have turned back up and they have found the poor Velma American guy with no tongue and eyes and they're like, look what you've done, like you fucking fucked everything up.
Ardiff Bay is like, all right, we'll shed no more blood, but you guys are fucked up, man. I told you not to mess around here. You've gone and resurrected the fucking mummy. He's probably going to take over the world, so we got to go off and go back to the drawing board and think this through, like how we're going to deal with this. You guys are on the bad list. So they're like, oh shit, well let's get out of here. So they flee back to Cairo. And they're hanging out in Cairo. Everyone's kind of freaking out. You know, they're waiting for like the next boat or whatever they can get to get out of there and get as far away from the mummy as possible. Because the Americans now know anyone that stole the vital organs, Imhotep is coming back for those, because obviously he needs the organs for the ritual, but also he is going to steal the life force from anyone that possesses them. And that is going to be how he slowly rebuilds his body. We already seen him regain some physical body matter when he discovers the guy with no eyes and tongue and completely steals his essence, turns him into like a kind of like a little prune on the floor. It's a great visual as well where, because obviously he's a rotting corpse right now, so he doesn't want to just be bowling around on the street. So he's got this black cloak and black metal mask. It's really eerie seeing him just sitting there knowing that that rotting corpse is underneath him. But he's also has an assistant because when everyone was getting separated and fleeing down in the ruins, Benny comes across him, and it's such a great gag again where he sees the mummy and it's this monstrous rotting corpse is lunging towards him, and he pulls out a cross and starts praying to God, please save me. And that doesn't seem to work. So then he pulls out a little Buddha statue and he's like speaking Chinese or whatever language. And he's like, and that doesn't work. And he pulls out a Judaism one, and Imhotep recognizes that. And he's like, you speak my language. You could be useful. You can be my little assistant bitch, little sidekick guy who's going to, who's going to help me navigate through this modern world. Benny would have been great if he just showed up every now and then being a little weasel trying to steal gold, but the fact that he becomes the right-hand man to the evil figure in the film is just great.
There's a scene later where Rick O'Connell's trying to strong-arm Benny to get information about what the mummy's doing, and he's saying, why are you helping him? And he says, it's better to be the right hand of the devil, do you know what I mean? And the reason I say that, I don't actually blame Benny for doing that. Like, if there was this monster, like, I'd rather be on his fucking side than, like, against him. But
it was either that or die, I guess, like, you know. But the thing is, that's like I said before, Benny is a weasel. You're obviously not meant to like him, but you love him because he's such a weasel. Like, you love him for it. Like, he's such a great character.
Yeah, he's resourceful. He does what he needs to do. He can't beat... It's like you were talking about the RPG characters. He's not going to beat Rick O'Connell in a fist fight. No. So he does what he thinks is the best to win.
So Imhotep, every time he sucks the life force out of one of these people, he becomes physically more resembling his living self. But he also seems to become dramatically more powerful in the supernatural sense, because he sucks the life force out of the guy he's already taken the eyes and tongue from. Really felt bad for him, where he's just there with his bandage thing, and he thinks he's some prince who's come to help him, and he's trying to serve tea, and he knocks it over, and he's like, oh.
And then Benny's like, oh no,
no. Let me help you, sir. Yeah. He's loving the role, but it's not long before he captures the other two Americans and sucks their life force out. And every time he does, there's some kind of dramatic, supernatural alarm going off in the ether, fireballs start flying out of the sky and just erupting and taking people out, and there's a lunar eclipse out of nowhere all of a sudden, and all these things that are kind of like the 10 plagues of Moses are all playing out. At this point, he's basically resembling the actor that plays him, except for a couple of like open wounds revealing his like rotty mummy insides. And it's a great moment where he decides, I'm not quite there yet, but I think I'll have a pop in and see my human sacrifice, see how she's getting on. So seemingly turns himself into sand. You see the shot of just sand pouring through the keyhole into Evelyn's room while she's sleeping. And then he appears, and just as he's about to capture her, Rick O'Connell runs in, and we've already figured out from before that Imhotep is scared of cats, so he's literally holding a cat like a gun and just like aiming at him. And Imhotep freaks out, turns into a big sand spiral and flies out of the room.
I'm sorry, that just makes me laugh. It's this guy that can get locusts, can do a lunar eclipse, can lift people up in the air. He kills one of the Americans without even being there in person by going for an open window and seemingly sucking his life force with sand or whatever it is. But his one weakness of his all-powerfulness is a cat. And that just goes back to Egypt philosophy.
They were obsessed with the cats.
Yeah, with them being like the gardens of the underworld. So I did like that. Like, how powerful he was getting. The lore is still there and the scriptures are there,
Yeah, it was a great nod to that. As a culture, we know the Egyptians were obsessed with cats. It's also ingenious because it's almost like a substitute for plot armor. You know how in films like this, there's a very powerful creature or being. You need it to interact at close range with your main characters, but it seems to kill everyone else with ease, but there's always some way they just manage to get away, which is annoying. It's like, you'd probably forgive it in this film because it's like, fuck it, the kind of film it is, but it is always kind of annoying when that happens in a film. But in this, because they've got that one weakness Imhotep has, it allows the main characters to come into extreme close proximity with the mummy, interact with him on screen in sequences, yet have a get out clause, well, no pun intended, clause, so that they don't die. But also, you're kind of like, why didn't they keep using that? Like, I would have had a whole bag of stray cats.
RSPCA on the phone.
Yeah. I would have had a bazooka just loading cats into it the whole time when they go. They never use it again. Maybe there was no cats about, I don't know. But we see Imhotep has now become so powerful, He's discovered the last American, sucked him dry in the middle of the street, and he has an entire army of zombie mind control slaves that are just walking around chanting his name.
Imhotep, Imhotep.
He's trying to get to Evelyn because she is the human sacrifice. She is the key to it all. So they're like, fuck it, we need to get out of Dodge. So they're racing out of Cairo. Eventually they get cornered. They're going to escape through a sewers, but they've just realised, like, okay, we need to hand Evelyn over and escape. Like Ardif Bey says, you know, live today, fight tomorrow. Like, I know you don't like it, Rick O'Connell. I know you two are a good 2/3 into your love story subplot in the film, but like, you got to hand her over right now and we'll go back to the drawing board. So now Evelyn is whisked away along with Benny towards Hamanatra. He can travel as fast, I guess, as a sand tornado storm thing, whatever, however fast that is. Seems pretty fast because he gets there very quickly. So Rick O'Connell and Jonathan are kind of like, fuck, how are we going to get there? So this goes back to, again, like you said before, about how there's so many great minor characters in this film that make it up. And we already saw in Cairo where they're hanging out in the bar where there's this old British World War I veteran who's now he's just a drunk, and he walks through the fountain at one point by accident, and he looks down and says, someone spilled their drink here. Like, he's all confused and chewing someone's ear off with stories of the war and all the glory, and I wish I went down in flames. There's no wars anymore. I'm bored. And then he sees Rick O'Connell and he just switches around, and now he's just walking in his direction. So I don't know where he was going before. And he seems like he's just one of those old boys who just goes to the bar himself and just chews the ear off anyone he meets.
In the pub in the same seat. Back in my day, it was better, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But he's just a brilliant, stereotypical kind of character. They've introduced him with one scene, and then this next scene is basically the only other scene he has in the film. And I remember him as such a big, memorable character, and I was shocked by how little screen time he has. But they basically go to him and say, hey, you were a pilot in World War One, you're bored now? Well, we got an adventure that is incredibly dangerous, almost definitely going to end up with all of us dying. And he's like, fuck yeah, man. This is what I've been waiting for. So they get in the plane. Jonathan and Ardif are literally tied to the wings, and they're flying to Hamanatra. They arrive just at the same time as Imhotep, and we get another great set piece where he basically creates in his image a giant sandstorm to crash the airplane.
It's a really great scene because he's moved from the sand tornado to a giant sand face of himself that chases the plane down, and the only thing they can do is fire a machine gun at this ton of sand. It does nothing, obviously, and it's a really sad but touching scene where the plane crashes. Evie knows that it's going to kill him, so her only defense is to kiss Imhotep to distract him, to make him drop.
And it works, to be fair.
It drops to make him stop the giant sand face, and the plane crashes, and you're looking around like thinking, oh shit, has anyone died? You know, Rick's fine, Jonathan's fine, Ardif makes it out, but he runs over to the last of his squadron and he's in the seat and he's got his goggles on and he's died, unfortunately.
Bittersweet, because it's what he wanted. It's actually a great little arc for a short-lived character.
It's what he wanted, and also to top it all off, there's quicksand and he's in the seat. It's kind of like the captain with the Titanic, you know, going down. He sinks into the sand and Rick O'Connell turns around and goes, and I just was like, what a scene.
Gives them a salute. Yeah, it's brilliant. They arrive at Hamanatra ready to try and stop the ritual, whilst the mummified corpse of Imhotep's mistress is placed on a stone table next to Evelyn.
Yeah, it's a great scene because Evelyn's tied up on the stone table. There's like rats running all over her and she's like, ugh. She turns and like, you've got this fucking horrid mummified mistress, and it's frightening, but you're thinking, you know, Rick O'Connell and the boys are going to turn up. That's what's great about it.
It's interesting as well because she gets reanimated, which is smart because I assumed Evelyn would have to be sacrificed and then his lover would be reanimated. But she gets reanimated, but she's still a corpse. And I guess Evelyn's sacrifice will be what then gives her flesh and body back. But it's great because it allows her reanimated mummy corpse to play out in the final action sequence that goes off.
Our band of heroes are doing their side quests while Evelyn's stuck to the table trying to find the book, as you said, and there's a great line where they come across the statue and Jonathan's like, oh, Horace, my old mate, and then you know they find the book and race to the scene where the ritual's taking place. But unfortunately, Rachel Weisz's character, who's the fountain of knowledge, which will be great in this situation, is sort of out of action because she's tied to the table. So it's up to Jonathan to try and read the scriptures.
He's not as good as her.
He's not as good at... So he's going through it and going, I don't know this symbol. It's bouncing down to Evie, who's like, it's a blah, 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 blah.
It's a bit like a trial of the traitors where he's describing what the hieroglyphic looks like to her, trying his best to describe it. And then she's thinking, what is... Oh, maybe it's this, and shouting the words to him.
And he's getting it wrong. His instructions have like animated, I guess they're like mummified Pharaoh's bodyguards. I think they are.
The originals.
The originals, not the descendants. And Evie's saying to Jonathan, no, you need to continue so you can finish controlling them. But until he's finished the passage, because Imhotep can speak the language, he has then commanded the Pharaoh's bodyguard to start attacking Rick and the team. And it's just fucking chaos because you've got his mistress running around doing stuff. You've got the Pharaoh's bodyguards attacking him. Rick's being like, oh, this is a fucking nightmare, just trying to survive.
Evelyn's managed to get free or been broken free, but now the mummified corpse of Imhotep's lover has also broken free. So they're having a little cat fight.
Yeah. While all this is going on, Imhotep then resurrects his little priest people who are then chasing after Ardif and Rick. And it's a great scene where he kind of sacrifices himself to go off and fight all the priests. And he's like, just save the girl. And Rick gets a dynamite and blows it up and he says, time to close the door. Like, great one-liner again. And you're kind of sad. I don't know if Ardif can survive this, So
Ardif can survive anything.
So you think he's gone. Through the classic British character bumbling around for ages and ages, Evelyn shouts out what the final passage is, and Jonathan's able to read it correctly to swing back the Pharaoh's bodyguards to their control now, just as it's cornered Rick. And it's a classic like film trope where the spears are like on his head.
One's literally like pushing into his cheek.
And just as they're about to murder him, back to originally where they was about to shoot him at the start of the film and something happens and stops it. Rick's a very lucky guy, by the way. That's twice he's escaped there. So they've got the Pharaoh's bodyguard under control, but it's now on Evie to get to the book to read the passages that takes away Imhotep's soul to make him mortal to finish him off.
So the guards turn to Imhotep's horror and march right up to his lover and just kill her. I mean, I don't know how you kill a reanimated corpse, but they're reanimated corpses themselves, so I guess it can work that way. So they all start slashing her in a great little silhouette, similar to the silhouette murder we see in the opening where the pharaoh's being killed, and she's hacked to death. Imhotep is distraught, but also fucking pissed now, so he decides to turn his anger on Rick O'Connell, and you're thinking, okay, is he going to create a plague of locusts? Is he going to become a rock monster like he did with the sand and kill him instantly? Is he going to suck the life force out of him? But no, he just decides to punch him across the room. Buffy the Vampire style where it's super strength. So you hit someone, it's hard enough to send him across the room, but for some reason your fist doesn't go right through him. And he walks up to him and then punches him across the room a bit more. So I guess you could say, all right, he's all powerful. He's toying with his prey before he kills it. But it is a bit like, come on, Imhotep.
Yeah.
You've been a corpse for 3,000 years. You've finally been brought back. You're basically right there with being you are all powerful. The only thing you haven't managed to do is bring your mistress back, but you could probably sort that out again.
Yeah.
Once you deal with this little thing. Just kill Evelyn. Don't let her read from the book. But he just kind of acts like a fucking idiot all of a sudden. Doesn't use his magic powers to kill Rick instantly either. And he's just kind of like slapping him about the room. And Evelyn manages to finish reading the passage. Another bad CGI blue ethereal kind of chariot comes out of nowhere. It's not a good effect anymore, but it's still in the moment really sells you. Like it's a great effect in the moment, especially as a kid. But the ethereal chariot races along, grabs Imhotep's soul, and races off back into the underworld, I'm assuming. Imhotep is fine, though. He's not dead. He's not alive. Even Rick's kind of like, what the fuck? He's still standing there. But as he goes to square up to Rick again to slap him about a bit more, Rick stabs him, and they realise he's now mortal, and he falls to the floor dead.
Yeah, he doesn't just fall to the floor. He seems to proceed to walk backwards into like a bubbling black lake. And he just like sinks down like Arnie in Terminator 2, which like his head just drops and he mutters something in the ancient Egyptian language. And
Death is only the beginning.
Death is only the beginning, which puts the seeds into your head. Could there be a sequel coming up here? Like,
Let's see if the film's successful.
Yeah.
It's definitely set up for one. And we get the ancient ruins equivalent of the Bond villain lair is in self-destruct mode, because the whole temple starts to shake, and as we heard earlier, it was set up so that it could just disappear underneath the sand. So everyone's racing out of there. They're racing past the giant piles of treasure and gold, and Jonathan kind of stops like,
please, just take
please,
something.
could we just grab something? And they're like, no, get out of here. The whole ceiling is kind of coming down on them. Benny emerges again, and Rick, being the hero, despite everything Benny's done, still tries to save him, but he's not able to. And he mutters that line, "Goodbye, Benny," and then runs off.
Bye, Benny.
And we're stuck with Benny again as all the lights start to go out in the temple. His flames starting to go out just as all the scarab beetles show up again. It's funny how they're just kind of not there for long periods and then just decide to show up. Don't know what that's about, but anyway, it's like the room is being flooded with them, like they're just everywhere surrounding him, and they're just upon him as the flame goes out, and we just hear his screams in the darkness.
Yeah, we don't actually see the beetles eating him, but you
know he's fucked.
And before that, Benny has actually managed to drag a bag of gold treasure to a camel. I don't know why he didn't leave. I guess he was just
greedy,
He's
isn't he?
greedy, and his greed got the better of him, killed him in the end. And it's funny because earlier on, Evie said, "Rats like you or bad people like you always get your comeuppance," and he does get his comeuppance. So that was great. It ends with Jonathan saying, "Oh, because he'd got no treasure, like, we've left empty-handed." And then Rick and Evie look at each other, and Rick goes, "I wouldn't say that." And then they start kissing, and then Jonathan's like stamping the sand, like, "For fuck's sake!"
And you're like fist pumping, like, yes, man.
And what's great about it is they all get on the camel. And what they don't realise is the sunlight kind of shines down, and it shines onto... They've got on Benji's camel with a bag of gold, and you're like...
I never even realised that.
Yeah. So Jonathan or Rick or Eve... I think Rick and Eve are on the same one. Jonathan's behind. Their one has the bag of gold in it, and it just shuts. So
sweet.
The heroes got everything they wanted in the end. Rick's got the girl, and Jonathan's got the gold he wanted in the end. So what a film, man.
What a fucking film, man. I don't even need to ask you if you're going to recommend it, because it is just fantastic. I've loved this film since I was a kid. It's so effortlessly likeable. I never really ask Sophie if she wants to watch the film we're going to review. Usually I just do it in my own time, but I thought, fuck it. Let me ask her. I said, "Do you want to watch The Mummy?" It's a bit of a random film to throw out there to a casual film watcher. And immediately she was like, "Yes, man, I love The Mummy. I haven't thought about that film in years." Everyone loves this film. It's just effortless to enjoy. It doesn't take itself seriously. It treads a fine line between virtually parody at times, yet never feels ridiculous. I'm always sucked in by the serious moments, the impending doom, the action sequences, and the brilliant lines of dialogue and witty jokes and ridiculous cartoonish gags in between. Never disconnect for me. It's just a perfect film. It flows perfectly. There's not a single bit of fat to trim. Just incredible. And that's an easy recommendation for The Mummy.